right, so we're going deep on the name 50 Cent today.
Yeah.
So, you know the rapper, of course, but did you know there was like a first 50 Cent?
The OG?
Yeah, back in the 80s.
Wow.
His story is nuts.
Yeah.
Brooklyn in the 80s crime cache, and a nickname that's more myth than fact.
Right.
We're going through an excerpt from Wikipedia all about Kelvin Darnell Martin,
All right.
ready to unpack it all.
Absolutely. Kelvin Martin's story is fascinating, where true crime and like pop culture collide.
Yeah.
Makes you think about how these legends get started, especially in a place like 80s Brooklyn.
For sure. So picture this Fort Greene, Brooklyn, back when it was a little rough around the edges,
Really?
Yeah, Kelvin Martin, young guy, building his reputation. But it's that nickname 50 Cent that really sticks.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, nobody seems to know for sure where it came from.
That's right. A total mystery.
Right.
Some say he got the name because he'd rob anybody. Didn't matter if they had $1 or $100.
Wow.
Others say it came from some crazy dice game where he turned like 50 cents into a ton of cash.
Really?
Yeah.
And then there's that whole thing about his 5'2", 120 pounds maybe?
Small guy.
Yeah, almost ironic, like he's 50 Cent, but he's this small, wiry dude.
Yeah, it's that whole don't judge a book by its cover thing, right?
Yeah.
Small stature, but man, he commanded a presence.
Oh, yeah.
To get a nickname like that.
And that name, whatever it really means, seemed to follow him everywhere. Rikers Island, back and forth between the Bronx and Brooklyn, a real product of his environment,
Yeah.
Especially with his grandmother, Irene Martin, raising him for a while. You can just feel that 80s Brooklyn in his story.
Yeah, you get a real sense of the time and place.
Yeah.
And the more you learn about Kelvin Martin, the more mysterious he gets. All those stories about his nickname just make him even more legendary.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if it was all intentional, like he was creating this myth around himself.
Huh. So this is where the story gets a little dark. October 20, 1987, Kelvin shot in his girlfriend's building in Crown Heights. He fought for his life for 4 days at Kings County Hospital, but...
Tough.
Yeah.
That's the reality of that world. Julio Wimo Acevedo ended up serving about 10 years for manslaughter in Kelvin's death.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that actions have consequences, even in a chaotic world like that.
It's heavy stuff, but Kelvin Martin's story, it didn't end with his death.
It blows on.
Yeah, fast forward to 2012, a documentary comes out called The Infamous Times, Volume 1, the original 50 Cent.
I've seen that.
That says something, right?
Definitely.
This guy's life, short as it was, it still has an impact even decades later.
And that's the big question, isn't it? Why does Kelvin Martin's story still resonate with us?
Right.
Is it the name, the mystery, the violence? Or is there something more, something about his life that speaks to bigger issues like poverty, ambition, the pull of the streets? That's what we're going to explore. So you really can't talk about Kelvin Martin without talking about Brooklyn in the 80s.
Yeah.
Fort Greene, where he spent a lot of his time. It was a totally different world back then.
Not like all the, fancy places they have now.
No, not exactly.
Right.
I mean, poverty was everywhere. Crime was just a part of life. And opportunities for young people were pretty much non-existent.
Right.
You can see how a guy like Kelvin, with not many options, might end up on the streets.
It's like his environment really made him who he was, right?
Absolutely. And Kelvin's story, it isn't just about Brooklyn in the 80s.
Right.
It's a bigger problem that we're still dealing with today. Poverty and crime, they're still happening in communities all across the country.
Makes you wonder if things have really changed at all.
Yeah, it definitely raises questions about how we solve these problems.
Yeah.
But Kelvin Martin's story at least reminds us that these are real people with complicated lives, people making tough choices in tough situations.
So how do we square that, the darker side of his life, the robberies, the violence, with this image of him as like a folk hero, this almost mythical figure?
Well, the documentary, The Infamous Times, it shows the reality of his actions.
Yeah.
It doesn't hide the pain he caused. It paints a picture of a flawed person.
That's good. At least it's honest.
Right. And that's important because it makes us think about his character, and the choices he made. It reminds us that things aren't always black and white.
Right.
Even someone involved in crime can be both a product of their environment and someone people look up to.
And that nickname 50 Cent, that adds a whole other layer to it.
Yeah.
It went from being just a street name to a symbol of, being notorious and surviving.
It's wild how that name became like a stamp of approval on the streets, like you were someone to be reckoned with.
Right.
And then you have the rapper, 50 Cent, who saw something of himself in Kelvin's story
Oh, yeah.
and took on that name.
Talk about a legacy. That name became a legend on the streets and then a hip-hop icon.
It just goes to show you the power of a name and how it can change meaning. Over time, Kelvin's story became like a blueprint for the rapper.
Yeah.
It represented this raw determination to beat the odds.
But even with the documentary, there's still so many questions about Kelvin.
Right.
All the different stories about his name just make him even more intriguing.
It's like an urban legend that keeps getting passed down. And every time someone tells it, it gets a little more exaggerated.
Yeah.
And in a way, that mystery reflects how complicated his life was.
We may never know the whole truth, and maybe that's what keeps his story alive.
It's a reminder that the best stories sometimes are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers. They make us think critically, look at things from different angles, and accept that life isn't always simple.
So we've got this fascinating guy, Kelvin Martin, but his story, it's not all sunshine and roses, you know? What's the big takeaway here? Why should anyone outside of Brooklyn even care about this?
You know, it's funny. Kelvin Martin's life, as messed up as it ended, it kind of gives us a look into some really big issues that are still around today.
Like what?
When we're talking poverty, the pull of street life, how some neighborhoods can feel like a pressure cooker, you know?
Yeah.
This stuff didn't just disappear in the 80s.
Right. It's like his story is from a different time, but the themes are still relevant today. We see the same things happening all over the place.
Exactly. And it would be easy to just write Kelvin off as a criminal, end of story.
Right.
But it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
His story makes you think about the choices he had, the pressures he was facing. It humanizes those problems we hear about on the news.
You said it. And then there's that whole thing with his name, 50 Cent.
Oh, yeah.
It's more than just a name at this point. It's a symbol.
It's amazing how powerful that name became.
Yeah.
On the street, it made you were fearless. You know, you were a hustler no matter what. And then for the rapper 50 Cent, it became about resilience, about overcoming a tough past.
It's like Kelvin Martin's story gave the rapper a starting point, but he changed what the name meant.
And that's what's so interesting about it. It makes you think about how legacies are formed, how symbols change meaning over time. Why was the rapper drawn to that name? What did he see in Kelvin's life that he connected with?
Man, this whole deep dive has been crazy. It's really made me think about these issues in a different way.
It's powerful stuff.
Definitely adding that documentary, The Infamous Times, to my watch list.
It's a great film. You'll see Kelvin Martin's world in a whole new way, and you'll understand the things that shaped him. Who knows, maybe it'll even make you think about the hidden stories and the real lives that are all around us, but we don't always see them.
This has been awesome. Thanks for taking us through it. For everyone listening, think about this. How much does your name or what people think of you, how much does that affect who you are? And what about the stories that are hidden right in your own community? What stories are just waiting to be discovered and understood?